ecosystems maintain the quality of the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. Every aspect of our life support systems on this planet are controlled by natural ecosystems. We've destroyed most of that capability. That's why we're facing runaway global warming, runaway sea level rise, and all these disasters. And in effect, the only way we can get out of that is to find clever ways to regenerate these ecosystems in their natural services, to stabilize climate at safe levels. And we need to be very clever about it because we need to act very fast. We need to make them more productive, more fertile, more biodiverse, and more resilient to extreme climatic stress. And that's true of all ecosystems worldwide. And we've heard some very good examples of how people are doing that on land, and there are many ways to do that. Every ecosystem can be regenerated. I'm just going to talk about now what we do in the ocean to grow back ecosystems. Now, every marine ecosystem is on the verge of collapse. And none is worse than coral reefs, which is the one ecosystem I work in, and which turns out to be the most productive and the most valuable of all ecosystems per unit area, but also it's the most vulnerable to any kind of stress. And therefore, coral reefs passed the tipping point, the temperature tipping point for mass bleaching 35 years ago. That's when we saw bleaching suddenly appear. And we realized at the time what was happening, but no one would listen and they'd refuse to do anything to try to save reefs. It's just gotten worse and worse. So there are many tipping points. People talk about when is the tipping point. There isn't one, there are hundreds of them. Every ecosystem has its own tipping point. Coral reefs are going to be the first to go if we don't draw CO2 out of the atmosphere on a very large scale very quickly, but many other ecosystems will follow. So I want to talk really about what we do to grow back marine ecosystems, and I'm going to focus on the issue of shore protection, because the fact is that global warming is causing global sea level rise, and we're losing essentially all the beaches in the world. Okay, we are on a trajectory right now of runaway global warming that is going to result in about 70 meters of sea level rise. Okay, IPCC doesn't tell you that because IPCC is only telling us about the first 100 years of a process that is going to continue for thousands and thousands of years, and they're ignoring more than 90% of the impacts. We have to deal with the real impacts, not with politically selected responses that don't only cover the initial point. So we fooled ourselves as to how it's far worse than people realize. As I say, what we're headed for is 70 meters of sea level rise, but that will take thousands of years to happen. It won't happen in our lifetime. But that's where we're headed if we don't act very quickly to reverse global warming and sea level rise. So billions of people are going to lose their homes. And so I want to focus on that issue of shore protection now. And I'm not going to show any video, we don't have time. I have video showing how the beaches in Puerto Rico are being washed away by waves. And the reason is because the reefs died. The reefs made the sand, the reefs protect the sand from being washed away, and they're dead. So until we regenerate those reefs, we're not going to have our beaches back, and they're going to continue to wash away. Now, in Puerto Rico, the beaches all used to have sand dunes covered with vegetation, and that stabilized them. The first thing people did is they cut down the vegetation so they could see the water and build hotels, and then the wind blew the sand away, and then the beach washed away, and that's happened over and over. These are some of the last remnants here of the sand dunes in Puerto Rico, and where they are, they protect the land. And now, when they remove them, that's what you see there. The sand dunes are gone, the beach is gone, and the buildings are collapsing into the sea. So this is a worldwide problem. These are just some examples from San Juan in Puerto Rico. And there what people are doing is they're restoring ecosystems. They're planting back the beach vegetation. When they do that, it traps sand and builds up the height. And actually you build high sand dunes that way. But they have to restore their reefs, their mangroves, and their seagrasses as well. But the point is, ecosystem regeneration works. It's the only thing that does. Now, I'm going to skip this. This is a village I work in Indonesia called Pulau Ganga. And this village keeps being flooded by sea level rise over and over again. They're desperate. Every time they have enough money to buy a bag of cement, they build a wall. They all fall down. They keep having to move inland. And this is village of very poor fishermen that are essentially losing all their resources. Now, what the government did there is they came in with a lot of money and they built a huge seawall, And what a seawall does is it causes erosion. A seawall causes the waves to reflect, and that washes away all the sand in front of the seawall or the breakwater, and then it washes away the sand underneath, and then it collapses. And then they have to build it over and over again. So they cause erosion, they don't prevent it. And you can see that here. This seawall here has resulted in loss of the beach that these villagers used to put their boats on. It's gone. And because the seawall is now on the edge of collapsing, they had to spend even more money to dump rocks in front. So this is very expensive. This is about $15 million a kilometer to do this almost anywhere in the world. And it has never ever worked anywhere. Every seawall that's ever been built has fallen down or will. So it just doesn't work. Now, at this site here, if you go about 100 meters further south, there's this beach here that we grew back in months, naturally. And we did that by growing very small coral reefs, we call bio-rock coral reefs. I don't have a pointer here, I don't think. No, whoops, sorry, that was not what I was trying to do. But we grew a bunch of little, oh, here is this one. These are little reefs that we built in front of there. And this beach literally had disappeared when we began. We grew that back literally in a few months by growing reefs in front of that beach, and we just grew the whole beach back. And the way we do it is what we call bio-rock technology. We grow solid limestone rock in the sea. We build steel frames of any size or shape. We put a little trickle charge into it from a solar panel, and that grows, this is from the Maldives, most of these pieces, that grows solid rock 2 to 3 times harder than concrete. It's the only marine construction material that's growing and getting strong with age. And it's also self-repairing. This is a reef we had in Bali that was hit by a boat and cracked off the limestone that we grew, the solid rock. And you can see the steel had been in the ocean for 11 years. It had no rusting on it. And then a year later, it grew back. So these are structures that act like coral reefs. They're growing, they replace themselves, they heal themselves, and that's how they make the beaches. The coral reef creates the beaches because it's a growing structure and it's generating sand. So what we do is we replicate that. These are reefs we built in Turks and Caicos Islands before and after the 2 worst hurricanes in their history. And the hurricanes actually built up sand under our reefs instead of washing away, whereas solid concrete structures, the opposite happened. They caused so much scour and erosion around them that the structures collapsed or actually sunk into the sand. So we build, design like nature does, we can in fact do this. And the waves that pass through a reef like this, 97% of the energy is absorbed by the reef. The reef is there to adapt it to wave energy. It gets its food, it gets rid of its excrements that way. I mean, it's essential to have good wave energy, but they're adapted to trapping wave energy, using it, and not being destroyed themselves. No artificial structure does that. So at this particular site in Indonesia, this was how it was when we began. This was in December 2015. This beach had been steadily eroding. They kept having to move the buildings inland before they fell into the sea. The trees were collapsing and so forth. And so we built about 50 little reefs right in front of that beach. Literally in about 2 months, 80% of that beach grew back. So in about 2 or 3 months, 80% of that beach grew back. Okay, because we simply grew natural reefs in front of it, and that beach has continued to grow. It keeps getting taller, wider, longer, and so forth at all seasons of the year. So we can actually turn severely eroding beaches into growing ones. We do that by regenerating the ecosystems in front, the seagrasses, the salt marshes, the mangroves, the coral reefs. We attract all kinds of fish, and we actually regenerate the marine ecosystems, the fisheries, and the productivity at the same time as we go back to beach. And we do that at about a cost that's about 10 times less than what a seawall costs. It has no ecological benefits whatsoever. So, our whole strategy here is to grow back beaches by restoring ecosystems. This is in the Maldives in 1997. Maldives, every island is washing away. This island, you can see what happened. Their beach, the trees are falling down, the buildings are collapsing into the sea. We grew a reef in front of that with bio-rock, right in front of that eroding beach. And we built it, there was no sand there. It was on bare rock. It cemented itself to the bottom, and as corals grew and it grew stronger, the waves slowed down passing through it, and the sand built up under, and then the beach grew back. And then That's the new beach we grew. When we began, that building was about to collapse into the sea, and we grew that beach back in about 1 or 2 years. So it really worked. This shows you the reef that we grew here. That's the beach we grew back. And in 1998, when there was severe coral bleaching in the Maldives, about 99% of the corals in the reef in front died from high temperature in about 2 weeks. Just like that. Most of our corals on our structure survived. They were just healthier, they were stronger, they were going many times faster, and they're able to resist the stress. And the result is all the fish moved out of the dead reef into the reef we had grown. And for about 10 or 15 years, that was the only resort in the Maldives that had a natural beach with a live coral reef full of fish right in front of it. And so it's possible to do. That's that new beach 10 years later. This is a 4-year-old reef we built in Bali in Indonesia. This is in an area where everything had died. It was just sand and bare rubble. And what you can see here is we can build structures of any size or shape, and everything grows on it. We put a few broken corals on it. They grow like mad, like you can see these incredible corals here. And they build up huge fish populations. Every form of marine life is attracted and comes to these structures. So in fact, we regenerate the biodiversity higher than it was before, which is really amazing. And we build up higher fish populations because we can build structures of any size or shape with as many holes as we want, so that we create more hiding places for fish. So we're able to really, make it better than it was, oddly enough. This is another 4-year-old reef in Indonesia. In Indonesia, we've built about 600 of these. Done other projects in about 30 countries. We invented this technology in Jamaica, which is my home island, 30 years ago. But we worked with no funding. There's no funding for marine ecosystem restoration, but this is what we do. This is in Bali, and you can see here when we began, there was almost no live coral. 10 years later, there's live coral all over the place. Sorry, I went the wrong way. And that had spontaneously settled and grown all over. So, more beaches. This beach here, when we began, there was no beach here. We grew a bunch of reefs in front and we created that whole beach. We've done this over and over again in Indonesia, many places. I mean, I'm not going to take the time to go through it now, but in all these places here, that seawall was collapsing a year before we grew reefs in front. The sand built right up. The neighbors didn't have a reef, and look what happened to them. That seawall was built the same time as the other one, and it already collapsed. So by growing back the natural ecosystem, we regenerate everything. We do that also with salt marshes and seagrasses. And this is a beach we grew back in New York City by growing oysters and salt marshes. Salt marsh grass, so that worked perfectly well. This is the Mediterranean, where we're growing seagrass on bare rock, which no one had ever done before, because our plants are growing so quickly they attach to the rock and they build up a whole ecosystem of fish and shrimp and crabs and everything else.